She kept repeating the same question, again and again, until Karoline finally had enough. And what happened next? It stunned everyone in that room. The space was packed, buzzing with anticipation. A solid row of cameras lined the back wall, their lenses locked onto the podium where Karoline Leavitt stood, poised and composed. She wasn't new to handling tough crowds. She had done this plenty of times before. But today felt different. The air inside the Washington, D.C. briefing room carried a heavy tension, an unspoken charge lingering beneath the surface. Karoline took a quick breath and adjusted the microphone. "Good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started." Immediately, hands shot up from all over the room. Journalists, eager and relentless, fought to get their questions in first. Their hunger for a headline was almost tangible. Karoline scanned the crowd and pointed at a familiar face, a seasoned reporter from a major network. The question? A straightforward one about the administration's latest policy on tax cuts. With practiced ease, she delivered a smooth, polished response, one that came naturally with the job. Then came another question, this time a follow-up on education reform. Again, Karoline handled it seamlessly, like she had done 100 times before. The key? Stay firm, stay in control, and navigate the press with the skill of a professional. But then it happened. A voice sliced through the room, sharper than the rest. "Miss Leavitt, let's talk about the real issue here." Karoline recognized that voice instantly. Her, the liberal reporter. Always aggressive, always pushing, always fishing for controversy. She was seated near the front, leaning in, her lips curling into a smirk. Tap, 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 her pen drummed against her notepad, the rhythm slow, calculated. Karoline stayed composed. "Go ahead," she said, her tone cool, controlled. The reporter wasted no time. "Do you believe the administration's policies are intentionally designed to suppress certain communities?" "Because the data suggests." Karoline raised a hand, cutting her off. "I've answered that question before. The administration is focused on policies that benefit all Americans, regardless of background. Now, if you'd like to discuss today's topic, I'd be happy to continue." A low murmur rippled through the room. But the reporter? She wasn't done, not even close. Leaning in further, her voice carried an edge. "You didn't actually answer the question, though. Can you directly address whether—" "I did answer," Karoline interrupted, her tone firm yet measured. She cast a glance at the other journalists, subtly signaling that she was ready to move on. For a brief moment, it seemed like things might settle. The tension in the room eased, if only slightly. But then, "I just don't understand why you're avoiding it," the reporter pushed, her voice slicing through the air. "It's a simple yes or no. Are these policies suppressing marginalized groups?" The temperature in the room shifted. Everyone felt it. Journalists exchanged glances. Some looked intrigued, others uncomfortable. No one liked a press conference turning into a showdown, but that's exactly what this was becoming. Karoline exhaled slowly. "I'm not avoiding anything. I'm staying on topic. If you have a question related to today's discussion, I'll gladly answer it. Otherwise, I'll be moving on." But the reporter wasn't backing down. She leaned even closer to the mic, "So, that's a no comment?" The air in the room grew heavier. The energy? Tense. Everyone felt the weight of the moment settle onto their shoulders. This wasn't just another press briefing anymore. This was a spectacle. A hush fell over the room. Not an empty silence, but one thick with meaning. The kind of silence that waited, like a stretched elastic band seconds before snapping. Karoline adjusted her stance, both hands placed firmly on the podium. "I've answered your question," she stated, her voice unwavering. "I'll be moving on now." She pointed to another journalist in the back, ready to pivot. But before they could even open their mouth, the same voice cut through. Again. "Why is it so hard for you to give a straight answer?" A flicker of irritation flashed across Karoline's face, just for a split second. Barely noticeable, but enough for the keen-eyed journalists to catch. She wasn't new to this. She knew how reporters operated. Asking tough questions? That was their job. But this wasn't about accountability. This was about turning a press conference into a personal stage. A few cameras shifted, now panning from Karoline to the reporter, capturing every subtle movement, every glance, every reaction, every moment that could be twisted into a headline. Karoline inhaled deeply through her nose. I don't believe in wasting anyone's time. If you have a new question, I'll answer it. Otherwise, I'd like to give others a chance. The reporter smirked.
Sure.
New question. Why is this administration so afraid of transparency? A few quiet gasps. Some reporters scribbled furiously, sensing that this moment was escalating. Karoline didn't blink, not immediately at least. Her grip on the podium tightened just for a moment before she released it, exhaling ever so slightly. Then she smiled, but not the warm, diplomatic smile she had perfected over the years.
No.
This was different. This was a smile that said, I see exactly what you're trying to do. She let the pause linger just long enough. Then, with precision, she delivered her response. Transparency? That's exactly what this administration stands for. But what you're doing here, this isn't about transparency. This is about theatrics. The words hit their mark. The reporter's smirk? It wavered. Not much, but enough. A journalist from the back, an older veteran of the press, cleared his throat. Karoline, if I could. But again, the same voice interrupted. So, are you dismissing valid concerns as theatrics? The American people deserve real answers. The cameras captured everything. The sharp tilt of Karoline's head. The way the other journalists shifted in their seats, some visibly frustrated, others just watching the moment unfold. A senior reporter, someone who had covered politics for decades, leaned toward a colleague and muttered, "This isn't journalism. This is performance art." But the reporter didn't care. She knew exactly what she was doing. The longer she dragged this out, the more likely it was to go viral. A confrontation like this? Gold for social media. Karoline saw it too. She had a choice: engage and fuel the spectacle or shut it down. She exhaled, her patience razor-thin. Finally, she glanced toward security at the side of the room.
She didn't need to say anything.
That look? It was enough. The room tensed. Everyone felt the shift. And, in that moment, everything changed. She knew exactly what that glance meant. This wasn't just an argument anymore. It was about to escalate. The air in the room felt thicker, pressing down on everyone like an invisible weight. No one spoke. No one moved. But the tension? It was palpable, so dense that it seemed to hold every single person frozen in place. Karoline felt it. She saw it, too, the way some journalists avoided eye contact, the way others gripped their pens just a little tighter. They weren't just watching, they were waiting to see what would happen next. And at the center of it all was her. The reporter, sharp-eyed, unwavering, sat motionless, her pen resting idly against her notepad. A quiet smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. She wasn't here to ask a question. She was here to make a point. Karoline took a measured breath, straightened her posture, and spoke. I'll say this one more time. If you have a relevant question, I will gladly answer it. But I'm not going to stand here and engage in bad faith arguments. A soft chuckle escaped the reporter as she shook her head, her smirk deepening. Bad faith? Karoline, I'm just doing my job. Isn't that what a free press is for? Karoline didn't blink. A free press is about holding people accountable. What you're doing is turning this into a spectacle. A murmur rippled through the room. Some journalists exchanged glances, sensing the shift. This wasn't about policy anymore. This was something else. Something bigger. The reporter tapped her pen against the table.
Once.
Deliberately. So, just to be clear, Karoline knew what was coming before the words even left her lips. Are you refusing to answer because you can't, or because you don't want to? Silence. A few reporters inhaled sharply, bracing for what came next. Karoline exhaled, steady and composed. I'm refusing to play a game. This press conference is not about you. The reporter's smirk flickered, just for a second. Then, leaning back in her chair, she crossed her arms.
Right.
Because expecting transparency is just a game. Huh. This time, the murmurs weren't subtle. A few journalists whispered to each other. Some glanced toward Karoline, waiting, watching, to see how she would handle this. Karoline had faced tough reporters before. But this wasn't about policy. This was about control. About who would steer the conversation. She adjusted the microphone slightly, then took a step back from the podium. Her next words sent a shockwave through the room. "I think we're done here." The reporter's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me?" Karoline didn't flinch. "You've made it very clear that you're not interested in a real discussion. You're here for a headline. If you'd like to stay and listen to the rest of this press conference, you're welcome to. But I won't be answering any more of your questions." The reporter let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "So, silencing the press?"
Got it.
Karoline's jaw tightened. She had been expecting that. She knew exactly how this moment would be spun the second the cameras turned off. But she also knew that with people like this, there was no winning. She cast a glance toward security. A subtle, wordless signal. And just like that, everything changed. The room shifted. People adjusted in their seats. The tension stretched from uneasy anticipation to full-blown confrontation. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was becoming something much bigger. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Journalists weren't just watching now. They were recording every second, every movement. The hum of camera shutters clicking filled the air, capturing the exact moment Karoline's gaze met security's. The reporter saw it too. Her smirk?
Gone.
"You're seriously doing this?" she asked, her voice lower now, but sharp enough to cut through the thick silence. Karoline didn't answer. A uniformed officer stationed by the door took a slow, deliberate step forward. He didn't need to say anything. The message was clear. The reporter had two choices: de-escalate or double down. She chose the latter. "This is unbelievable," she muttered, shaking her head. Then, louder, making sure the cameras caught every word. "So much for freedom of the press, huh?" Karoline remained still. Freedom of the press doesn't mean hijacking a press conference. The reporter let out a dry laugh, glancing around the room, almost as if inviting the other journalists to agree with her. Some shifted uncomfortably. A few scribbled notes. But no one spoke. The security officer took another step forward. For a split second, the reporter hesitated. She could stand her ground, force them to physically remove her. That would be a viral moment. Or she could walk out on her own terms and control the narrative another way. Karoline watched the decision play out behind the reporter's eyes. Then, slowly, the woman reached for her notepad. She stood, adjusted the strap of her bag. "This is a disgrace," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for the microphones to catch. Then, one final jab before heading toward the exit. "You can kick me out, but you can't silence the truth." Karoline didn't respond. The door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, it was over. Or at least it should have been. But the silence that followed? It was heavy. No one quite knew what to do next. The cameras were still rolling. Some journalists kept their eyes down, pretending to scribble notes. Others just stared. Then, from the back of the room, a voice. "Karoline, do you think this was the right decision?" She turned her gaze toward the journalist who had spoken. "I think it was necessary." Another voice. "You don't think this will backfire?" Oh, she knew it would. She knew that before she even left this room, the internet would already be flooded with clips. She could already see the headlines. Karoline Leavitt removes reporter for asking tough questions. Did it matter? She straightened. "We're here to have discussions, not disruptions. If anyone else has real questions, I'm happy to answer them." A beat of hesitation. Then slowly, a hand went up. The press conference continued. But the real storm? That was just beginning. Within minutes, the footage would spread like wildfire. And by the time Karoline stepped off the podium, her name was already trending.